My name is LeeAnn Atwood, and I'm with the Crystal Lake Historic Preservation Commission. And I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about American Terra Cotta. And before we get started, just want a show of hands. How many people are here because they're really interested in Tico pottery? Ooh, not bad. Okay, how many in architectural ornamentation? And how many are just history buffs and want to get a little bit more information? Good, good. Good to hear. Well, I've lived in Crystal Lake for about 20 years, and I've probably passed TC Industries hundreds, if not thousands of times because I have family in Johnsburg. And every time I pass, I slow down as I'm going through that hill, and I look inside and gaze lovingly through the lights and through the windows at the train that's in the window and the museum that you can see but you can't touch, and the big fence with the electronic stuff on it that says you can't come in here. And I've always wondered what it was behind there, what it meant. And I knew it was connected to Tico pottery and also that it was connected to architectural stuff, but I really didn't know the ins and outs of it. So when the opportunity came up to learn a little bit, I jumped and actually opened my first book about 2.5 months ago. So I don't know much because there's a lot. Also, it's timing that spans about 130 years. And that's a long time. So for the purpose of today's discussion, I'm going to focus on the first 50 years. We'll wrap up with a couple of sentences about the latter half, but the beginning is going to be the founding, how it came to be, the kinds of products that were produced, and who the people were that were key players. So I hope I don't disappoint anybody. We only have an hour, so there's not enough time to really go through the whole thing. Hopefully we'll have some time at the end. I'm willing to stay as long as the folks in the back will stay. And I understand some of you might have come with some Tico examples or some clay pottery examples. And at the end, we'd love to have you stand up and talk a little bit about what you have, because I know everybody's really interested. So bear with me, and those of you that raised your hands about your different areas of interest and expertise, when it comes up at the end and people have questions, I'm going to point to you for the answers, because I only know what I'm talking about. That's it. So, okay, let's get started. In 1881, 50 miles northwest of Chicago, a young company in McHenry County was manufacturing burnt clay hollow blocks for what would later become the early skyscrapers in Chicago and cities throughout the U.S. This same company would eventually mass produce originally designed art pottery called Tico or Tico ware, that would become coveted collector items a mere century later. The American Terra Cotta and Ceramic Company, one of the Midwest's 4 main producers of architectural terracotta, had their main office in downtown Chicago, close to where all the building was happening after the Great Fire of 1871. But the real hub of activity was off Highway 31 near the town of Nunde, accessible to a railroad stop that was coined Terra Cotta by the company's founder, Chicago attorney William Day Gates. Evidence of American Terra Cotta's role in art and architecture are robust and abundant throughout the Chicago area and in McHenry County. Walk along downtown Crystal Lake and look for the gargoyles, frescoes, and other intricately molded terracotta work designed and supplied by American Terra Cotta. Visit the Chicago History Museum, where they have a nice collection of Tico pottery, or even closer, the McHenry County Historical Museum, where there are several pieces in its collection, including a fireplace surround. Hussman Elementary School in Crystal Lake is home to Lincoln-era frescoes originally commissioned for the University of Illinois, bequeathed to Hussman by none other than founder William Day Gates. But before we take that turn, let's talk a bit about the history of the property that currently is owned by TC Industries. How is this sound? Too loud, too soft? Too soft? Okay. I'll slow down a little bit. William Day Gates, an attorney from Chicago, was raised in Nunde and returned to the area after receiving an inheritance from the death of his father, Simon Gates, an early settler who owned large tracts of land throughout the area. In short order, William Day quit his law practice, purchased the McMillan Mill property, and devoted himself entirely to the possibilities surrounding the use of clay that was so abundant in the area. Simon Gates is pictured above with his wife, Sylvia. And I think it's nice that she has a half smile on her face. Most of them don't. By 1881, an old mill on the property that had been refitted to grind the clay was found on the land. The mules pictured transporting clay are named Theodore Roosevelt and William Jennings Bryan. The picture on the left, here's the mules, was taken around 1911. A collection of wooden buildings and brick kilns grew up around it, forming a small village known locally as Terra Cotta. Below is an 1884 view of Spring Valley Tile Works on the north side of the mill pond. To the upper right is a view of American Terra Cotta in 1902. He named his new company the Spring Valley Tile Works, with the plant initially manufacturing drain tile, which was important in reclaiming swampland in the McHenry County area for farming. Meanwhile, in Chicago, it was swiftly rising from the ashes of the Great Fire of 1871. Bordered by Lake Michigan and the Chicago River, the downtown area could only grow skyward. With the advent of the steel-frame skyscraper, Terra Cotta really took off. Because the blocks were hollow and only an inch or so thick, they were lightweight and fireproof, which was of prime importance to post-fire Chicagoans. The molded pieces were ideal for the exteriors of the building. On the lower left, you see the Spring Valley Tile Works in 1881, and on the upper right, the beehive-shaped muffle kilns around 1910. By 1921, the plant had 15 muffle kilns. Gates soon became interested in more than just making drain tile for draining swamps. He turned his attention to producing architectural terracotta. With its superior clay beds and spring-fed water supply, the 72-acre site was ideal. Manufacturing molded terracotta was a labor-intensive process. A great deal of room was required to make dry and store the product. And of course, the nearby railroad stop was a definite plus. On the upper right, you see a farmhouse built in 1851, which was originally part of the McMillan property. It became the administrative office in 1950 and was originally part of the McMillan Mill. In operation as a plant office from 1895 to 1966 was lower right, the factory office. And you see some terracotta evidence on the side of the building and then pots all around. Terracotta is a clay product made from a combination of clay, water, and grit, which is used to bulk up the mixture. Designs were modeled in clay, and plaster molds were made from the clay models. Then the mixture was pressed into plaster molds. After a glaze was applied, the pieces were fired at high temperatures in large muffle kilns and cooled slowly, then packed and shipped to the building sites. Large, elaborate ornaments were composed of a number of smaller pieces. And this is actually a picture that is from the site, and you can see them hand mixing the clay. You can imagine how laborious that was. In 1894, Gates showcased the workmanship of terracotta by building an 18-room French Gothic-style mansion in Hinsdale for his first wife, Ida May, and their family. Above are pictures of Ida May Babcock Gates as a young woman and in her later years. The large photo is of Ida May and her children on American terracotta grounds. Although the plant was located in what was now known as Terra Cotta, the corporate office for the company was in several locations in Chicago, finding permanent home until 1929 in the Hibbard Mansion on 1701 South Prairie Avenue. As the business matured, the company changed names to Terra Cotta Tile Works and then to the American Terracotta and Ceramic Company. Each name change incorporated new ventures to include the manufacture of glazed structural tile and Tico pottery. On the upper right is a business card of W.D. Gates for Terra Cotta Tile Works, art pottery, and terracotta. And you'll notice that it says it is in Terra Cotta, Illinois, which was how it was known at the time. Early descriptions of Gates claim he was a tall, slightly built Midwesterner of generous nature who loved to make people laugh. A homespun philosopher, he was in great demand as a speaker because of his sense of humor and inexhaustible fund of stories. He was a good boss and a fair man, and his employees showed their loyalty by staying for many years and attracting generations of their family members into the business. Common Clay is the company newsletter largely written and constructed by W.D. Gates. Here's an excerpt from it. From the beginning, it was teamwork, and it has so continued, each one working to put into the material the very best there was in him, and proud of his work. The result of this is that for more than 40 years, the company has sent products all over the country, from Winnipeg to New Orleans, and from the Atlantic to the Pacific. Lasting work, beautiful work, and work with individuality wrought into it. Clearly, pride and workmanship was a priority to Mr. Gates. On the left, you can see WD standing next to a 7-foot tall vase. He had them all over his property. And then on the right is one of the original stamps that they had on the property. Gates' son, Major Earl Gates, and Neil Herbert Gates were instrumental in managing the operations of this family business. By 1910, the village of Terra Cotta was a lively, ethnically diverse place. The regular workforce was made up of Germans, Norwegians, and Swedes, among many others. The company operated a work camp housing nearly 50 young men who had been imported from Italy to live on site and work as skilled laborers. Built in 1885 on a hill overlooking the plant, Gates designed a house of hollow square terracotta blocks made at American terracotta. Used as a summer residence for his family, the house had a vine-covered loggia that shaded a reflecting pool surrounded by beautiful Tico pottery. Between 1902 and 1923, most workers who did not live on site got to the factory on a special train that ran from the ice house in Crystal Lake to the plant. A round-trip ride was only 10 cents. The train left the ice house at 6:15 and slowed down at each street crossing. The workers would swing aboard the slowly moving train, arriving at the plant just before 7. In the late afternoon, it brought incoming freight, picked up the passenger cars, and took employees back to Crystal Lake. The terracotta chapel on plant grounds is pictured above. If a minister was unavailable, W.D. Gates himself would officiate for the workers and their families. The below image was taken in 1903 of the official Tico band. Members wore uniforms of dark green with black trim, and organized concerts were common on the grounds. It is clear that Terra Cotta was quite the community. The above image on the left was taken in 1990 of clay modelers Bondi Nelson and Walter C. Heidel. Heidel was instrumental to American Terra Cotta, and with leadership presented by lead modeler Christian Schneider, created molds based upon architect Louis Sullivan's designs. Look carefully. Behind the lion is a sheet of damp burlap which was draped over the model to keep it from drying out. The below picture was taken in 1926 of modeler Edward Schiller sitting in front of his clay model. By 1927, Terra Cotta was so popular that 325 men were on the payroll to keep up with construction and demand. Legendary architect William LeBaron Jenney made Chicago's skyward growth possible with the 1889 design of such building as the Manhattan on South Dearborn, on the left, known as the oldest surviving skyscraper in the world to use a purely skeletal supporting structure. Later in 1891, Jenney designed the Ludington Building on Wabash, which is still standing and home to Columbia College. The Ludington Building was the first Chicago skyscraper to be entirely clad in terracotta, manufactured by American Terracotta. Because of his architectural vision, Jenney is renowned as the father of the American skyscraper. During this building boom, Gates became a contemporary with those who helped create the Chicago School of Architecture. Louis H. Sullivan, Dankmar Adler, William LeBaron Jenney, Frank Lloyd Wright, and Daniel Burnham. Gates was a savvy businessman and encouraged his architect friends to submit designs for ornamental terracotta and eventually for Tico ware. The decorative pottery he added to his line around 1890. He knew they would only become more sought after if their names were attached. Sullivan is pictured with terracotta known as Sullivan-esque tiles, which he designed for mass production. They became popular molds used in architecture for the next 20 years. Sullivan's work was intertwined through collaboration with William Gates and American terracotta modeler Christian Schneider in particular. Sullivan was one of the most influential architects to come out of the Chicago School in the late 1800s. He conceived the most famous phrase ever to come out of his profession: form follows function, or more accurately, form ever follows function. Pictured here is Carson Peary Scott, then in 1899 and currently. His most outstanding surviving works using terracotta from American are in Chicago and include the 1893 Auditorium Theater on Michigan Avenue and the 1899 Carson Peary Scott department store on South State Street. As homage to Sullivan, both are fully functional businesses today. And this is a rendering of the Auditorium Theater in 1893. The National Farmers Bank in Minnesota was designed by Sullivan in 1906. Known as the Prairie School style, it was the most famous of all of Sullivan's bank designs and is considered a jewel box of the prairie, featuring gold leaf arches, stained glass windows, and Nouveau Baroque art designs, all created at American Terracotta. Perhaps Sullivan's most profound influence is evidenced in the work of Frank Lloyd Wright, who spent more than 6 years as his chief draftsman before going on his own to advance Sullivan's idea of American architecture into his prairie homes and, more far-reaching, the Prairie School of the early 1900s. In 1909, Christian Schneider joined American as chief modeler because of his reputation for being one of the most capable modelers in the country. He was entrusted with major architectural commissions and translating Sullivan's designs into three-dimensional terracotta ornamentation. In 1920, Major Gates developed and patented an electrically controlled spray gun that could supply 3 streams of glaze at once. Called the pulsicrometer, it produced various speckled effects simulating a granite finish called pulsichrome. Prior to its invention, one color was applied at a time to create a mottled effect, which was very time-consuming and nearly impossible to match effect when using different batches. This is the picture of Christian Schneider, and here he is working with Major Gates, who was the son of William Day Gates. Christian Schneider is pictured standing next to a clay model of the large exterior cartouche at the National Farmers Bank in Minnesota in 1907. It's a hazy picture, but you can see him right here. As mentioned, one of Schneider's gifts was his ability to take a flat sketch submitted by architects and translate it into a fully dimensional model. Here's an example of sketch to finish. Sketch on the left, finish on the right. This one was likely designed by Sullivan protege George Elmsley. The Edison Elementary School is located in Hammond, Indiana, and has terracotta architectural elements throughout. In 1910, Schneider was commissioned to sculpt a series of terracotta panels called the Lincoln Pictorial History for Lincoln Memorial Hall at the University of Illinois, Urbana. Models of the Lincoln plaques are now in the Hussman Elementary School in Crystal Lake. Schneider held the position of chief modeler at American Terracotta until it closed in 1930. Walter C. Heidel, pictured at left, worked in the modeling department under the direction of Christian Schneider and became known for his expertise in executing Sullivan-esque ornamentation. He is posed next to a terracotta model for the Indiana Theater in 1921. Heidel was the only other sculptor at the company who had the touch to do work for Louis Sullivan and George Elmsley. National Farmers Bank in Minnesota was designed by Sullivan in 1907 and is referred to as Sullivan's Jewel Box architecture, one of 8 banks nationally to have that designation. The primary color for the terracotta ornamentation is green, and deliberately contrasts with the dark-hued brick. The bank is a destination for many lovers of the Prairie School of Architecture, works of Sullivan, and intricate ornamental terracotta. The last 20 years of Louis Sullivan's life were certainly without the renown he enjoyed in his heyday. After the Panic of 1893, Sullivan, like many others, went into a financial and emotional decline. His commissions were few and he was faced with chronic financial problems and ultimately alcoholism. When Sullivan, today known as the father of modernism, died penniless in 1924, Frank Lloyd Wright paid for his funeral. For several years, he lay in an unmarked grave in Graceland Cemetery, the same cemetery which, ironically, held two elaborate mausoleums of his own design. One of them, the Carrie Eliza Getty tomb, was commissioned in 1890. Less than 100 years later, the tomb and Sullivan's work was honored with official designation by the Commission on Chicago Landmarks. It's important to note also that Louis Sullivan was a regular in the Crystal Lake and Nunde area at that time. Five years after his death, a committee led by fellow architects designed and planned a monument in Sullivan's memory. The project was financed with donations, and Christian Schneider of American Terracotta designed and created the Central Medallion. Louis Sullivan is buried at Graceland Cemetery in Chicago. And now we come to Tico. Gates, an avid potter himself, continued to experiment with several shapes, clays, and glazes, and in 1899 came out with the Tico line of pottery, choosing the name from the T-E or T in Terra and the Co in Cotta. Soon after, Gates and his chemists developed the highly sought-after Tico Matte Green, for which the company is quite famous. And this is an early advertisement for Tico. After mastering the shade of green, Gates continued to experiment with new arts and crafts shapes for his pottery. Gates Pottery was the name given to this subsidiary. And you see above there is a stamp that is common with Tico over here that's actually in the pottery and the tiles itself. And this is an example of Tico that is currently owned by a local Crystal Lakean. Among the designers and architects associated with Tico are Frank Lloyd Wright, Fritz Wilhelm Elbert, and George Grant Elmsley. By 1910, there were more than 300 original Tico designs, half of which were generated by Gates himself. Each original design was cast in molds, processed assembly line style, and fired in kilns when production of architectural terracotta was slow. The above picture shows plaster molds of Tico ware. The pottery was radically different because it followed the organic dictates of the Prairie School. It was said that Tico was the ceramic expression of the Prairie School, stressing utility as well as beauty. The smooth, curved lines and geometric shapes were some of the earliest expressions of modernism in art in the United States. The expanding arts and crafts movement provided Gates a solid customer base for Tico pottery. Tico, possibly more so than any other similar pottery from its time, seems particularly at home in arts and crafts bungalows and houses designed by Frank Lloyd Wright and other prairie-style architects. What separated Tico from other pottery producers were the architectural and organic designs, leaves, petals, and lilies. This 1903 scene is in the Pompeian Room at the Congress Hotel in Chicago. The Tico vases are 7 feet tall. The factory produced an amazing variety of Tico ware, sugar bowls and creamers, ashtrays, bookends, candlesticks, garden urns, lamp bases, and bird baths. Although the pottery was produced in different colors and glazes, the shade Tico green is the most sought after and associated with the brand. These are Tico examples of design by Fritz Elbert. Tico was first produced from 1902 to 1929 as relatively inexpensive daily wear pottery. Most pieces were priced from $2 to $5, with some ranging up to $20. As time passed and trends changed, teak ware in the average home was broken or thrown away. In its day, it was an inexpensive piece of pottery, and no one thought to save it. Here are some examples of teak designed by Frank Lloyd Wright in the early 1900s. A quick eBay search shows that teak ware is on the market currently from $250 to $5,000, depending on the piece and the designer. Of course, a vase designed by Frank Lloyd Wright would likely not end up on a site like eBay, rather would be auctioned at an unimaginable price due to the low number produced. There are many companies creating mass reproductions of teak pottery today. Stories of teak showing up in garage sales for a song is not unbelievable because many people have no idea of the value of what they have packed away in the attic. Here's an example of teak ware designed by William Day Gates himself, and if you recall, he designed more than half of his creations. In 1929, Frank Lloyd Wright created original terracotta sculptures as a tribute to the Winnebago Indians. They were designed and fired at American Terracotta. The statue on the right is called Nakoma, the warrior, who is teaching his son to shoot a bow. The other statue he named Nakomis, who is carrying a bowl with her two children. These statues were gifted by Frank Lloyd Wright personally to an American Terracotta employee, and they have remained in the family since. They are considered priceless. I apologize for the fuzzy picture. This is from a passport, the only photo I could find. For decades, Kate's prospered and his Crystal Lake plant grew. At one time, there were 300 people working and living there. In its height, several rail cars of pottery were shipped daily to Chicago and the rest of the country. In 1921, W.D. Gates retired from daily management of the business and lived with his second wife, Catherine, in a newly constructed home on the property that he called Trail's End, designed with terracotta inside and out. Gates is pictured above with his wife, Catherine. Pictured are 1927 scenes from Gates' home, Trail's End. Gates is shown reading in front of the terracotta tiled fireplace. You can see him here, and the fireplace is right over here. Trail's End was a local showplace for residents of nearby Crystal Lake. A woodland garden ornamented with teak garden pottery and terracotta statuary surrounded the Spanish-style home. A pair of terracotta lions guarded the driveway. The home still exists and was recently purchased. Extensive renovation is underway. The entire home is incorporated with terracotta. The interior had terracotta columns, teak lighting fixtures, and a fireplace faced with teak tiles. Colorful glazed samples covered the floors. The area is now quite overgrown, but we are assured that the new owners are bringing it back to its original splendor. Bringing Trail's End back to its original beauty and ornamentation will be a blessing to the community. Look carefully at the statuary, ornate terracotta column, and tiled fireplace. And sadly, it's kind of dim here, but the colors that are in this column and on the fireplace are vibrant blues, greens, yellows. They're absolutely beautiful, and I'm sure when they get cleaned up and polished, they're going to shine beautifully. This is a sketch done by an architect colleague and friend of Gates. When the 1929 stock market crashed, so did Gates' empire. Along came the Depression, and like so many industries and businesses, there were hard times for the plant. No building was being done to any extent, and the lovely terracotta material was omitted as every effort was made to reduce expenses. It was a sad day when the business began to fail. Gates' health had been declining since 1930, and he died in January of 1935. His obituary states, Mr. Gates was known as a man of great brotherly love, a man of the most generous nature who looked upon the sunny side of life, and who had more enjoyment out of making his fellow man laugh than any one thing he did. Later that same year, Gates' longtime attorney and friend, George A. Berry Jr., and his wife purchased the American Terracotta and Ceramic Company at auction in Woodstock for $280,000. George Berry III remembers, when Father took over ATCC, Harry Lucas, president of Northwestern, presented him with a challenge. I want to welcome you to the Terra Cotta business, he said. When I get through with you, you'll be reaching up to me from the gutter for a crust of bread. This incensed my father, who made a public pledge to keep ATCC in business until it was the last leaf upon the tree. Berry set to work firing up the kilns for the next generation of production at American Terra Cotta. Pictured above are officers of the company currently: George A. Berry IV, Thomas Z. Hayward Jr., George A. Berry III, and Robert F. Berry. As the Depression cleared, the Terra Cotta plant operated slowly at first and then with definite progress. By World War II, the plant was humming both on the production of terra cotta and through the construction of large buildings. Steel treating work came to be a major part of this successful business. For many years, it was not profitable to produce architectural ornaments, nor was pottery in demand. The production of terra cotta had slowed from 1940 through the 60s, halting completely in 1966 with the last replacement piece made for the Wrigley Building in Chicago. Today, TC Industries has expanded internationally, employs more than 700 people, and remains under the leadership of the Berry family. The Wrigley Building was designed by architect Charles Biersman in 1921 and is internationally renowned for its distinctive terra cotta ornamentation. The building is clad in glazed terra cotta, which provides its gleaming white facade. On occasion, the entire building is hand-washed to preserve the exterior. American's last order was for replacement pieces for the Wrigley Building, the most famous terra cotta building in Chicago. And you can see up at the top the ornamentation. That was what was added in 1966. In 1976, the city of McHenry dismantled the Pearl Street Bridge. TC Industries acquired it for their property in Crystal Lake, where it is currently. George A. Berry III stands by a wall displaying the history of transportation originally made for the Baker Garage in St. Charles, Illinois. Both of these items are on the site of TC Industries. In 1989, the lobby of TC Industries was designated to preserve and display the company's history. Examples of Teco-ware and terracotta ornamentation are on permanent display in the lobby and on the grounds of TC Industries. Unfortunately, it's difficult to get in to have a look at it. So I'm sharing this picture with you now. You can see that there's some lovely work. You can evidence of the columns that are similar to Trails End. You've got some tile work and frescoes, and I'm sure a nice collection of Teco-ware. I have not yet been to the building, but it is on my list. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the Chicago buildings. By 1913, American Terracotta Commissions included an impressive number of skyscrapers designed by America's most prominent architects. The company had fabricated terracotta for soaring Chicago-style office buildings and hotels in most major Midwestern cities, and for a few as far away as Pennsylvania and Canada. The largest concentration could be found in the Minnesota cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul. As the population of steel frame construction rose to a fever pitch from 1885 to 1890, the use of terracotta increased more rapidly than that of any other building material, largely because architects specified that terracotta be used to sheathe the iron or steel frames of the tall commercial buildings that began to dominate downtown America. The adaptability of terracotta to structural steel frame construction revolutionized the terracotta industry and caused it to expand rapidly. Builders of the new skyscrapers found terracotta an attractive medium because of its lightness, durability, and potential for decorative uses, attributes that stemmed from the nature of the material. Here we come to some local examples of architectural terracotta. The building on the left, right about there, is the United States Bank building, now Finn McCool's, at 72 North William Street. The building on the right is the Home State Bank building. It says VJ Knox on the top at 78 North William Street. The United States Bank operated in downtown Crystal Lake from 1916 until 1931. The glazed terracotta blocks, columns, and ornament on the facade of the building were added in 1927. The Home State Building was constructed by Morris Cohn and leased to Home State Bank in 1916. The building boasts a glazed terracotta facade, 2 engaged Corinthian columns of classical revival architecture flank the entrance. And here's a picture of them today. The Techler Building currently houses Heisler's Bouderie and is at 50 North William Street. With classical revival style architecture, the building was built in 1910 by C.L. Techler, an early real estate tycoon. The facade facing William Street is glazed with terracotta. The Altivar Theater at 26 North William Street, now known as the Rouse Center for the Arts. Just as in 1929, the entrance is flanked by 2 wide, tapering, ivory-colored terracotta towers, supporting an ornate mission-style gable. The entire front parapet wall is capped off with rich, flowing terracotta. The buff brick facade is accented by ornate timber supports, arched openings with terracotta coining, highlighted by the bright clay tile roofs. The McCollum-Lowell Building is currently home to Judith Svalander School of Ballet and is located at 83 East Woodstock Street. Built in 1908 by A.W. McCollum, this classical revival-style building is adorned with glazed terracotta. Note, on the left is Heisler's Bouderie, and on the right is the Crystal Lake Herald. Central High School was originally called the Crystal Lake Community High School and was built in 1924. It features ornamental terracotta throughout the exterior of the building. Dim lighting is making it difficult to see, but here's an example of large Tico pottery at a home on South Shore Drive in Crystal Lake. This picture was taken from a lake view just about 2 weeks ago when I walked across the lake to snap it. But you can see the 2, these are, I would say they're probably about 5 feet tall, and they are terracotta blue. Yerkes Observatory in Williams Bay was designed by the University of Chicago architect Henry Ives Cobb in 1895. The observatory has the world's largest refracting telescope and is successfully used for astronomy and a collection of over 150,000 photographic plates. Pictured are examples of terracotta, celestial and astronomical symbols, signs of the zodiac, and phases of the moon and the sun. Milton Barrow's hardware store in West Dundee was built in 1880. Ornate window caps like these were easily duplicated in terracotta. Mass production using molds made them less expensive than stone. Smooth ornamental terracotta from American is present on the ceramics building of U of I Urbana, Champaign in 1915. Here we show examples of intricate ornamental terracotta detail, starting at the left, Woodbury County Courthouse in Iowa, here, 1916. Lower right, the Aragon Ballroom in Chicago, 1925. And the upper right, pediment from the Shedd Aquarium in Chicago. American terracotta no longer exists as it did when visionary William D. Gates put things into history, making motion. However, the legacy conceived and created in Crystal Lake will remain for years to come in written word, oral history, museums, and private collections around the country and throughout the world. As William D. Gates himself said, "Books go the way of men and disappear, but burnt clay has an even chance of the immortality of physical being." So that's it for the official presentation today. Now I want to open it up to questions, and if I can't answer and someone else can, please, let me know. And also, did anyone come with Tico pottery or examples of tile that they'd be willing to share? Okay, would you mind?
We were digging a hole in 2006, and sure, we pulled this out of the hole. And on the back, it's got a code. The body is EB7, blue is 83 CT. It's got the color codes on the back. And we live in Crystal Lake, and it came out of the piece of properties in Crystal Lake in a portion of the town that was originally owned by Simon Gates. And my assumption is that it came from the American Terra Cotta Company. I can't imagine where else it would have come from. And my wife, since about 1992, has been collecting Tico pottery. And we didn't bring any of the pottery, but we got a bunch of pictures of that junk if you'd like to look at it.
The junk? Well, thanks for sharing. Have a seat. Do you mind if people come and just have a look?
Yeah, you can handle it.
Okay, good. Diana Kenny, you brought something in. You can hold your own.
Gee, thanks. There's a couple tiles back here on the podium that you can come take a look at. These were found up at a house, a yard on Hillside. A person purchased the house and looked out, and when the snow melted that spring, he had a patio. And the patio was made of these. And they're all terracotta. Some of them are marked with the word Tico, and some of them have the telltale Tico stamp on them with the big T and the little letters. So when he recognized what they were, he decided he would create a new patio. So he took these all up from the ground, and he has them stored, and he did donate these two pieces to the Crystal Lake Historical Society. And he has the remainder of them. So probably what was happening in his case, and maybe in your yard as well, is a factory worker lived there in that residence or near there. A lot of times there were cast off. A lot of times in the case of the colors with all the numbers, that might even be just they were experimenting around to get an idea of what looked good together, and whatever they didn't decide on, the guys just took home. So there's a lot of terracotta and Tico around Crystal Lake in places you wouldn't imagine, garages and attics, and always keep an eye open. But the telltale Tico mark is a large T with the ECO down the side, and it's on this one panel if you want to take a look. If you see something like that, don't sell it for $2.
Are there any questions? Yes.
Does anybody know where the old clay pits are? I know up along the Mississippi where Red Wing is, there's pits all over where they dug the Red Wing out of clay. Gotta be volumes of material.
Well, much of the clay was originally here, where TC Industries is now. I mean, they mined it from there till there was no more left to be mined.
Well, what I'm getting at is that there has to be a hole where the clay used to be. I wonder where that was.
I don't know.
It's east of 31, so it goes to the old town of Maryville. Right? And it's just, they took all the surface clay out, so there's no pit, because it was only so deep that it was the surface.
Yes?
The Gates home that you said was recently purchased and is being refurbished. Where is that?
I went searching for it, and I couldn't find it. Go ahead. Trails End, yes.
A friend of mine lived next door to it. It's on Terra Cotta Avenue. And my friend's house has big columns out in front. You go way back to the driveway, and this is to the north of that property. So I don't know the address or anything, but it's on Terra Cotta Avenue.
Yeah, it's set pretty far back from the road. You can't drive by and see it. Mm-hmm. Yes.
I worked in that house.
You did, in Trails End?
Years. The people that owned it last.
That's the Kumaros?
The Comoros.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I worked there back like over 25 years ago. I worked for them 25 years. That's when I started. And the fireplace is gorgeous, and the archway between the living room and dining room is positively beautiful. It's flowers, and it's so architectural, but they just let the house go to ruin. And now there is a man that is redoing it, and I've been in touch with.
He's right here.
You're the man. Oh, I've put a lot of pressure on you today, haven't I?
Major Gates, and Harry, Philip over here, and I all went to school together.
Major said that he knew someone that used to work.
Yes, that was me. He came in and saw the place one time when I was working there, and was, quite impressed with the way it was then. And then the older people died, and the kids just let it go to rot.
The condition when I bought it.
Oh, I know.
Yeah, and
I just talked to Major not too long ago out in California. I know he said that. Oh, they had so many beautiful statues that were in the middle of the yard stolen.
TC Industries owns most of it.
Oh.
They bought it.
Most of the statuary was stolen or broken. Major is so thrilled.
Are there any more questions? Can I give you this, though, so everyone can hear?
I'd make a comment. I don't know if Harry could remember this. If you, the old days, well, old days to me would be the 40s or somewhere in there. If you went, that was called Squaw Creek Road that separated Terra Cotta from the vacant property to the south. And that's where they used to put all the moles were out there. But as we grew up, all the trees had come up. And I can remember Peggy Danker. I don't know if anybody remembers her. She was a school teacher here quite a bit at the time. Her and her sister used to go out there, and they'd go in there. We wouldn't go out there because there was snakes and everything out there. But anyway, that's where people picked up all kinds of colored stuff. You remember where that was, Ardell? And that was just loaded with out there. I think it's all probably been cleaned out by now, but it was a forest of trees. And that's where all of the moles were just taken out and stacked, one after another. Were done. There was beautiful colored blues, red, whatever colors they used to make. They were quite vivid. I remember that. She saved quite a bit of them. Anyway, that was part of it, too. I doubt if there's anything left there now.
My uncle worked out at Terra Cotta for many years. George Ibish. When he was older, he had no fingerprints at all. His fingers were for working that thing for so many years. His fingers he had no fingerprints. Yeah, that's the.
What was his name again?
Ibish.
Did he have a brother named Hank?
Hank was his nephew.
His nephew.
Yeah.
I worked for Hank.
I was wondering if you know the location they typically built a vacation house to come out here in the summer when they have the other, you know where that one is?
It was on the property of right by TC Industries.
Oh, okay.
It's no longer there,
It's
though,
not.
Yeah.
That was part of the pictures you had with the pool
Yeah.
and the T-boat pieces around.
Yeah, it was beautiful.
There's a postcard of that house.
We have a postcard at the Historical Society. I don't know. I don't remember.
If you ever find the lines, the TC Industry has, one was broken off and there's only the teapot, and the other one's intact. And they have it in their museum. And George Berry's got to be a close friend, and he promised it to me at the house one day. So what we'll do is we'll reproduce it and put two reproduced ones out front.
Are you from this area?